So, not seeing a Santa rally as we close out the year, some profit taking. What's your sense of the way we're ending the year after what was a banner 2025 on Wall Street?
Well, it's funny. Global markets are closing with caution, right? Even though it was a banner year, right? You don't see the Santa Claus effect. It's more of the seasonalities. I think what I take away is, the shares are still mixed. I think investors still weigh the traditional year-end optimism against inflation and really the policy questions going into next year. And I think part of that kind of feeling hasn't, even though at record high, doesn't really feel like it.
Yeah, tariffs were a big story this year. How did U.S. companies on the whole, deal with trying to be nimble with all of the uncertainty? And what was the impact on markets overall?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that would be the word of the day, I guess, for the year. I would say is tariffs. Companies looked at this and they had to really be nimble. But what does that mean? Being nimble means putting some assets and cash on the side, not participating fully into the economies around the world, into the markets. And because of that, we saw the growth to not being as a recovery mode to more back to the fundamentals. And I think, not to get ahead of myself, but I think that's what 2026 will look like with those kind of returns, where this year it was really driven. The market was being held, let's be honest, by AI companies and the returns to that degree. And so that sector versus other sectors was holding on to what corporate companies were trying to do.
Let's talk about the Federal Reserve because that was also a really big story this year. Trump very unhappy with Fed Chair Jerome Powell and what he perceived was a slow pace of rate cuts. Now, actually saying he'll sue Powell. I've never heard anything like it in the history of the Fed. How do you think markets will react if something like that happens? And do you think the central bank has been aggressive enough when it comes to cuts?
Well, one, I hope it doesn't happen because markets react to that type of news into kind of, there's a large reaction to it. Percent days drops. You mentioned roller coasters. I think overall, inflation worries never fully disappeared. I mean, I think that's important. Yes, that it faded from crisis levels, but to your mention, I don't think it's in the best interest for the US, the federal chair, the incoming federal chair to cause it to be crisis level. It needs to be persistent enough that it is, to keep bond yields elevated and equities sensitive to every data point. And so for me, I think as the markets and investors look at this, including companies, there needs to be a smooth transition. I believe the US markets, and I would hope that the president, which I think he does see, that there needs to be a smooth transition and not a bumpy exit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about precious metals a little bit because week after week we've seen fresh record high gold prices. Now we saw silver just top $80. It's been a huge performer. It's up something like 150% this year. Do you see that continuing? And why the volatility surrounding silver right now? And then do you see gold hitting 5,000 like many in Asia believe?
Well, I mean, I think we need to buy more gold, is what you're telling me, and what we see in this whole year. And I think every conversation I've had, regardless of stocks, AI stocks, it is gold. I think the phenomenal piece to this is, I think you have to react to what people are doing, and they feel gold is safe, right? And that is what is driving the price. I think obviously in Asia specifically, right, gold is a part of that trade, a part of people's portfolios. And I think overall, I don't know if most people know that or not when you think about the markets, but it is. And so I do see it continue to grow. I also see that, I don't know if it's going to be at that record pace because we are going to see portfolios in the markets go toward fundamentals more. And to have a diversified risk portfolio moving forward when you're trying to get a higher return and, putting all your money in one egg, is not really the smartest thing to do. And I think that's what we're going to see people kind of right size their portfolios next year.
So where do you see smart investments happening in 2026 when you talk about diversification? Do we look at overseas markets? Where do you think people should be looking?
Yeah, I think the international market this year outperformed many of the U.S. indexes, and I think when you think about emerging markets in Asia this year, you see what outperformed. You saw Korea, Hong Kong equities, even in Europe, some of the major indexes that were at record levels, and even Japan. I think when you think of what is still recovering, right, is the U.S. equities too. So it's strong but narrow in some of the concentration leadership, and so for me, I think you see sectors when you think of manufacturing, obviously you think of tech, but you think of healthcare, you think of other things that AI is also going to implement in other industries. Again, not just AI companies, but things that are going to get more efficient. I think that's going to be still there. And I think the international market having a portfolio to that piece will provide some of that, you know, maybe a little bit more risk, but a little more return instead of having putting it all in, you know, in one sector.
Ryan, only about 30 seconds left. Want to ask you about Nvidia, big story this year. Does it continue to dominate the space, particularly with regulatory concerns and chip sales into China? And what sort of market dynamic do you see happening between the U.S. and China next year?
I mean, they have to work together. I think it's clear China and the U.S. They're not. It's not going anywhere, and I do feel like they both will work together. Obviously, be ups and downs. To the point to the semiconductor industry, you think of Nvidia, you mentioned AMD, and then there's everybody else. And this is hard for me. How do you evaluate these companies? What's the actual valuation? I think it's really hard to kind of put a pinpoint because it is still evolving. And so, do I see a continued run? I think you're going to see a run until they choose not to want to make that run when it comes to how the possibilities are there. And so I think to me, it's we are in. It's like talking about the internet. How can you make a cap when the internet just came? And I think the semiconductor industry is that, not just Nvidia. And I think that's really hard to place them where they should be when there is a lot of potential growth in that market still to come, especially globally.